Hi students, let's talk more about popular culture and intercultural communication. In the past weeks, we have touched on the subjects of history and intercultural communications, verbal communication as well as non-verbal communication. But the focus for this week is about popular culture. And it's such a fascinating subject because maybe many of us don't think about intercultural communication from this particular pop culture lens. So let's take a dive by defining what pop culture is. So if we take a look at this definition, according to your textbook, the popular culture is produced by culture industries and that it is different from folk culture and that it is ubiquitous, which is it's everywhere, and it fills a social function. So let's talk first about how it is produced by culture industries. We understand that popular culture are when we're thinking about, for instance, Marvel, or we're thinking about Disney, and we're thinking about The Mandalorian or Star Wars, we know that there is the big studio with huge budget that produced these movies. And not only were they able to hire um, really big names, really big actors, but they also have budgets to market these movies and actually promote them all around the world, not only in the US. So this is what we meant by it is produced by basically an industry that is focusing on producing popular culture, and that it is also different from folk culture, right? Because whenever we're thinking about popular culture, it's always defined implicitly or explicitly in contrast to other conceptual categories, such as folk cultures, which is the cultures of the people. The culture that is way more organic and not orchestrated with trying to produce as popular and the most money as possible. So, a full definition must always take this into account. Seen from this perspective, pop culture is also considered as a residual category, which is there to accommodate cultural texts and practices which fail to meet the required standards to qualify as, for instance, working class culture, folk culture, dominant culture. Yeah. So, what is more, pop culture is produced by culture industries within a capitalist system, like what I said before, and the products of pop culture are considered as commodities to be sold for profit. Unlike pop culture, folk cultures refer to the traditional rituals and traditions that maintain cultural group identity. Folk culture is typically not controlled by any industries and is not driven by a profit motive. And that's why the third characteristic of pop culture is that it's everywhere. We cannot escape it. We see it every day and it's everywhere. And finally, the fourth characteristic of pop culture is that it fills social functions. Communication scholar Horace Newcomb and Paul Hirsch suggest that television serves as a cultural forum for discussing and working out our ideas on a variety of topics. So nowadays we understand that it's not only television but also streaming platforms can serve this function. These, of course, make pop culture a profoundly political concept. So if you take a look at this definition, it says that pop culture is a site, yeah, it's a space where the construction of everyday life may be examined. The point of doing this is not only academic, that is, as an attempt to understand a process of practice, it is also political, to examine the power relations that constitute the form of everyday life and thus reveal the configurations of interests its construction serve. So we are looking at who is benefiting from having the most representation in the media. And we now, after we examine, we see that there are more diverse voices, but there are still the majority of voices that got heard in the majority of the pop culture. And this is worth examining. This idea of the power behind what it is that we're consuming, what it is that we're watching, what it is that we're listening to. So now let's talk about the US pop culture and this idea of power. When we think about pop culture, we need to think about not only the ways that people interpret, consume, or assign meanings to pop culture, but also the ways that these pop culture texts represent certain groups in specific ways. So it is difficult to measure the impact of the US and Western media and pop culture on the reset of the world, but we do know that we cannot ignore this dynamic. So the US government in the 1920s believed that having American movies on foreign screens would boost the sale of US goods. And nowadays, when you travel to other countries in the world, you see that a lot of the American goods were being sold and consumed by the populations in those countries. So whenever you go to, for instance, Europe or you go to Asia, it is not uncommon for you to see McDonald's, for you to see Pizza Hut, for you to see Starbucks, right? And this idea of using pop culture to be able to create this craving for these products and then sell the products to this market in a different, in different regions of the world is a very strategic marketing method created by a lot of the US corporations. Now, although US pop culture tends to dominate thanks to the modern technologies, other countries' pop culture, such as Japanese anime, British James Bond, and K-pop, are also embraced by the Americans. Now, I am going to ask you to click on this link to listen to a short, which is a very brief 3 minutes history about K-pop, and I hope you'll find something interesting by listening to it. The next concept that we're going to talk about is cultural imperialism. So the issue of cultural imperialism, which is the domination through the spread of cultural products, is complex. The interrelationship among economics, nationalisms, and culture make it difficult to determine how significant cultural imperialism might be. Now, scholar John Tomlinson identified 5 different ways of thinking about cultural imperialism. Number 1, we see it as a cultural domination. Number 2, we see it as media imperialism. Number 3, we see it as a nationalist discourse. And then we can also see it as a critique of global capitalism. And then it can also be perceived as a critique of modernity. Now, popular culture plays an enormous role in relations among nations worldwide. It is through pop culture that we try to understand the dynamics of other cultures and nations. Although most representations of other cultures in pop culture are problematic, we also rely on pop culture to understand many prominent issues about the others. Race, gender, and class are among the top 3 issues that we learn through pop culture, and these views shape how we perceive the world around us. I do want to encourage you to read more about this in your textbook because it, discuss even further about how cultural imperialism works. Now, if cultural imperialism is so strong, is there a way for people to resist the power of pop culture? Now, pop culture, according to Nadine Dolby, who is an Australian scholar, is a key site for the formation of identities, for the ways in which we make sense of the world and locate ourselves within it. Pop cultures as cultural texts, which are Cultural artifacts that convey norms, values, and beliefs becomes a site where we negotiate our own cultural identities, our view of ourselves in relation to the cultures we belong to. We can either accept or reject certain pop cultures that we view as in line or in opposition to our cultural beliefs. So, in a way, by deciding to identify with a specific pop culture and resist other pop cultures because it doesn't it's not in line with our values and norms and beliefs, it is our active way of resisting certain elements of popular culture. Another point that is so fascinating that is discussed in your textbook is about pop culture and stereotyping. Now, in what ways does reliance on pop culture create and reinforce stereotypes of different cultures, of different groups in our society, or of different races? The discussion questions for this week will ask you to listen to an NPR podcast, The Horror, Get Out and the Place of Race in Scary Movies, to think critically about how Blacks are commonly portrayed in horror movies. I thought that this week's topic about popular culture is just so fascinating, and I hope that you will be able to, you know, um, take away many important points from listening to the two NPR podcasts and then reading this week's chapter. Good luck, and I look forward to reading your answers in the discussion board.